The milk came again that night, hot, aching, and useless. Ayesha pressed a cold rag against her chest and bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. It didn't help. Nothing helped. Her breasts throbbed like they still had purpose, like her baby girl hadn't died 3 weeks ago with lips too blue to cry, like the tiny body hadn't been wrapped in her wedding shawl and buried under the mesquite tree behind Nolly's house. Her body didn't know the grave had closed. Her body still waited. Outside, the one-room Hogan coyotes yipped in the distance. Inside, Hashke's voice rose like a blade through silence. She eats our food, she uses our water, huh? And she sits there dripping milk for a ghost, he growled. She lost everything, Nolly whispered back, her voice low but shaking. And now she'll lose us too. Ayesha squeezed her eyes shut. The walls were made of packed earth, but his words went through like arrows. She didn't blame him. Not really. She took up space. She barely spoke. She cried at night when she thought no one heard. But Nolly's youngest little Tali always heard. And tonight, as if on cue, the child slipped under the thin blanket beside her and wrapped tiny arms around Ayesha's soft waist. "Why you sad again, Auntie?" she whispered. Ayesha tried to smile. "Go to sleep, little one. Is it 'cause your baby's still in the sky?" Ayesha nodded slowly. Her throat tightened. She didn't trust her voice. "She'll come back," Tali said, eyes heavy. "You just gotta wait." Ayesha didn't answer. She knew the girl meant well, but the dead didn't come back. Only milk did. By dawn, the pain in her chest was unbearable. The old rag was soaked through. She stepped outside into the freezing desert morning, her bare feet pressing into the cracked red soil. She didn't care. She needed air. She needed something to stop the way her ribs curled inward like they wanted to break. The sun hadn't yet touched the cliffs when she heard voices from the main road. 2 women mounted and gossiping, their words drifting downwind. Grayson's wife died birthing twins. The babies lived, for now. But no one'll nurse them. He asked all the ranches between here and Chaco. Everyone said no. Too much shame on that house, too much death. By sundown, those babies'll be gone too. Ayesha stood there, breath frozen in her throat. Twins. Hungry. Motherless. Alive. Her fingers dug into the sides of her shawl. Her body pulsed with the same silent truth it had repeated every night since her daughter died. You were made to feed something. She stared at the sky, so wide and merciless. The wind picked up cold and dry, pulling at her skirts. Later that morning, Nolly found her kneeling beside the buried bundle under the mesquite tree, whispering. "I heard them," Ayesha said, not turning around. Nolly stepped back. "He's white," she said gently. "His land is cursed. So was mine. You're not strong enough for this." Ayesha turned her face up. It was wet with tears, but her jaw was set like stone. "My body thinks she's still alive," she said. "And maybe she is. Just not in me." Nolly opened her mouth to stop her, but Ayesha was already inside, rolling her only dress and a cracked hairbrush into her bag. "You'll be shamed," Nolly warned. "I'm already shamed. You'll be hated. I've already been forgotten." Before the sun reached the edge of the mesa, Ayesha wrapped herself in the thick wool shawl her grandmother had woven and stepped out of her sister's life. The journey to Elias Grayson's ranch took 4 hours on foot. The sun was high by the time she passed the river, dried to a whisper. Her sandals broke apart before she reached the first bluff, but she kept walking barefoot, each stone slicing into skin, each mile burning away what was left of her hesitation. At the final ridge, she saw the ranch house, a skeleton of a place wood, bleached and curled, chimney half-collapsed fences, leaning like they were too tired to stand. Smoke rose in fits from the flue, and from inside she heard it. Two cries. Weak. Dying. Familiar. Her steps quickened. She reached the porch, knocked once. Then again. The door opened. A man, tall, pale, unshaven, stood there hollow-eyed. His shirt was stained. His arms were shaking as he held two small bundles wrapped in a horse blanket. The babies barely whimpered now, their cries so faint they sounded like wind between rocks. He stared at her confused. Ayasha swallowed hard. "My baby died," she said, voice cracking. "But my body doesn't know. I still have milk." He looked down at the twins, then back at her. "You don't look like a miracle." She blinked, stunned. "Neither did your babies when I heard them scream." He stepped aside. Inside smelled like smoke and sour cloth. Dishes piled high. Bottles knocked over. Blankets everywhere, none clean. Ayasha took the baby boy. His lips were turning gray. She sat on the floor, pulled aside her shawl, and tried. He wouldn't latch. "Please," she whispered, eyes full of salt. "Please, little one." She squeezed gently. A drop formed. She touched it to his mouth. A twitch. A tongue. Then, a latch. He drank slowly, then greedily. Color crept back into his cheeks. Elias fell to his knees, pressing his forehead to the floor. When the boy finally slipped into sleep, Ayasha looked up. "The other one," she said. He handed her the girl, who latched instantly. Ayasha rocked slowly, humming low, ancient Navajo tones her mother once sang during storms. The babies drank alive again. Elias didn't speak. He didn't need to. That night, long after the babies were asleep, Ayasha stood outside. The sky above was heavy with stars, cold and sharp. Elias leaned against the porch post behind her. "They're alive," he said. "For now. Will you stay?" She didn't answer at first. "My body thinks she's still alive," she whispered again. "And maybe it's right. Maybe she's here in your daughter's fingers, in your son's breath." She turned to look at him. "I'll stay tonight." He nodded. Inside, the fire dimmed. The air stilled. And in the quiet, two sleeping infants breathed in rhythm with a woman who came with nothing but might have brought everything. The sun had barely broken over the horizon when Elias found her still in the rocker by the fire, the twins asleep in her arms, her head tilted against the backrest, strands of black hair sticking to her damp cheeks. He stood in the doorway, unsure what to do. Her shawl had slipped halfway off one shoulder, exposing the faded collar of her dress. She looked like she hadn't moved all night. Maybe she hadn't. His gaze dropped to the infants nestled against her soft body, like they had always belonged there. One of them stirred Ki. He whimpered once, then burrowed deeper into the fold of Ayasha's arm. She opened her eyes. "You should have woken me," she said, voice rough with sleep. Elias shook his head. They were quiet. "You were watching." He didn't deny it. She looked down at the children, then gently shifted Sani into the makeshift cradle beside the fire. "I need water," she muttered, already rising. Elias followed her out to the pump well, the morning air biting at their skin. Ayasha filled a basin in silence. "Do you plan to stay longer than last night?" he asked. Ayasha rinsed her face, then wiped it with the end of her skirt. "I plan to stay as long as they need me," she said without looking at him. "I didn't ask what they need." I asked what you're doing here. Her hands stilled in the water. Elias folded his arms. You don't look like a miracle. She dried her hands and turned. Neither did your babies when I heard them scream, she said. He blinked. She left him standing there. Back inside, Ayasha cleaned the children with practiced ease. She'd brought little with her, but she borrowed a clean dishcloth from a stack in the corner and tore it into strips to wipe their mouths, their necks, their toes. Key fussed at first. Sani didn't. The girl had an old soul, quiet watching. Ayasha talked to them in low whispers, half in English, half in Navajo. It was her way. Her voice was rough from grief, but soft when she spoke to the children, like she knew something the rest of the world had forgotten. Elias hovered nearby, uncomfortable in his own home. The walls, once echoing with silence, now held murmurs and milk breath. By mid-morning, Ayasha had swept the floor, cleaned the cradle, folded Elias's laundry, and rearranged the chipped bowls on the open shelf. When he saw her emptying the soot pan from the fireplace, he finally spoke. You don't have to do all this. She paused, then looked at him flatly. Would you prefer I just nurse them and leave? I'm not sure what I prefer. Then don't speak like you've already decided. Her words weren't harsh, but they hit him like wind through a crack in the wall. Cold and clean. A knock came at the door. Elias flinched. Ayasha didn't. She already knew. Outside stood two riders, women from town, both with gloves and tight-lipped smiles. One was Hester Bell, the widow of the leather shop. The other was Mrs. Soren, who ran the post. They dismounted slowly, their eyes sweeping over the porch, the doorway, the rust on the hinges. One of them glanced at Ayasha through the open frame and said, There she is. Elias stepped out before they could say more. Ladies, he greeted stiff. Didn't expect visitors. Hester forced a smile. We heard about your situation. Mrs. Soren added, You should have said something. The whole town would have helped. Would they? Elias asked dry. The women glanced at each other. Hester leaned closer, voice just above a whisper. She's Navajo. I noticed. She's not your wife. Also true. She's feeding your children. She is. Mrs. Soren shifted uncomfortably. We just mean, there's appearances to consider. She's sleeping in a chair, Elias snapped, feeding the children that none of you would lift a finger for. You could have found someone more proper, Hester offered. Then why didn't any of the proper ones say yes? Silence. Ayasha stepped into the doorway, arms crossed. The women froze. She said nothing. They didn't either. Moments later, they rode off, their whispers trailing behind like dust in the wind. Elias didn't turn to her. I didn't ask them to come, he said. I know. He looked down. I should have told them off sooner. Ayasha stepped back inside. You didn't have to, she said. But she didn't smile. That afternoon, Elias saddled his horse and went out to check the fence line. Ayasha stayed with the twins who had begun to coo and stretch more with every feeding. They responded to her voice now. They opened their eyes when she sang. She didn't think of them as hers, but her body didn't know the difference. That night, she laid a worn wool blanket in front of the fire, tucked the twins in, and sat back in the rocker. Her hands were raw, her ankles swollen, but the ache in her chest had softened. She dozed. Elias returned, late boots, muddy hands, scratched. He stood over the cradle quietly. They like you, he said after a while. Ayasha opened her eyes. They don't know better, she replied. That's not true. She looked up. The firelight caught the tired in his face. You did a lot today, he added. I always do. I mean, you didn't have to. Ayasha sat up straight. I never do what I have to, she said. I do what's needed. There was a long silence. I don't know what to do with you, he said finally. You don't have to do anything. She looked at the babies, now asleep, then turned her gaze toward the door. But someone else will. They won't stay quiet. I can deal with talk. They won't stop at talk. Elias rubbed the back of his neck. Then I'll deal with more than talk. Ayasha rose slowly. You think this is just about what you'll allow, she said. It's not. It's about who you're willing to stand beside. And with that, she walked to the corner, lay down, and pulled the frayed shawl around her body. Elias sat at the table staring at nothing for a long time. He didn't sleep that night. Neither did she. And just before the first light broke across the mesa, hoofbeats approached the house again, this time heavier, faster. Ayasha sat up instantly. Elias moved to the door. Outside, a wagon appeared through the morning mist. Her stomach dropped. I know that horse, Ayasha whispered. Elias opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Hashke stood on the wagon bed, his face set like rock. Nali sat beside him, eyes swollen, mouth shut. They'd come for her. The wagon rattled to a stop just beyond the front porch. Dust from the road swirled around the wheels and drifted into the morning air like smoke from a fire that hadn't finished burning. Ayasha stood in the doorway, the twins cradled one in each arm, their tiny heads tucked against her chest. Her heart thudded low and heavy, as if her ribs were trying to close in on it. Hashke jumped down from the wagon before the wheels stopped spinning. His boots landed hard, and he looked straight at her lips, thin with judgment, jaw twitching under his beard. Behind him, Nali stepped down slowly, careful not to look Ayasha in the eye. Her hands were clasped together, wringing a faded handkerchief. Her dress was too thin for the wind, and her hair had been hastily braided, as if she hadn't expected to leave the house at all. I told you, Hashke said, his voice loud and sharp enough to make the babies stir. I knew she'd be here. Elias stepped outside behind Ayasha, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I didn't realize visitors were coming, he said coolly. We're not visitors, Hashke snapped. We're family. And I came to bring my wife's sister home before your scandal becomes hers. Ayasha's grip tightened on the babies. Kii whimpered. Sani stayed still. She came here of her own will, Elias replied. And she's not your property. Hashke ignored him. You think feeding some bastard twins makes you righteous? He said, eyes locked on Ayasha. You disgrace the blood that runs in you. Ayasha held his gaze. Her voice was low but even. I didn't disgrace anything. I answered cries no one else would. That's not your place. And whose is it? She asked. The women who turned their backs. The ones who stood at church whispering about dead babies like it was punishment. Hashke's eyes flared. You think this is about the babies? He pointed at her. This is about you. About how you left our home like some desperate woman chasing after a white man's pity. About how you sit in his house with no ring, no promise, leaking shame like milk down your dress. Ayasha's face went cold. You speak of shame like you've never brought it home. Nali winced behind him. Her eyes flicked up for the first time, bruises fresh beneath them, barely hidden by her scarf. Ayasha saw, but said nothing. Not now. Elias stepped forward now, slow and deliberate. You've said enough, he told Hashke. The wind shifted. A storm building in the west sent a dry gust across the yard, carrying Hashke's words and Ayasha's silence with it. Inside, the babies stirred. Sani began to cry. Ayasha turned back into the house. "Wait," Hashke barked. She didn't. She settled into the rocker by the fire and began to soothe the twins with a hum low and ancient. Nali followed, hesitant, stepping into the house like it might reject her. "I didn't want to come," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "They were talking. That you were a stain on our name." Ayasha didn't look up. "And what did you say?" Nali's voice trembled. "Nothing. I just packed the wagon." Ayasha nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." Outside, the two men stood off in silence, the air between them taut like wire pulled too tight. "She can't stay here," Hashke said. "She can do whatever she pleases," Elias replied. "She's your scandal now. She's the reason my children are alive." Hashke spat in the dirt. "You think that makes her holy, that makes this acceptable? I don't care what you find acceptable. You should. The town does." Elias didn't answer. Ayasha watched through the window, rocking slowly. Inside her, something bent. Not broke. Just bent, a silent shift, like a root pushing through stone. Later that day, the two visitors left. Nali said nothing more, just gave Ayasha one last look from the wagon, half apology, half fear. Hashke didn't even glance back. Ayasha stood on the porch long after the wagon disappeared from sight. Her arms were empty now. The twins had fallen asleep in their cradle. The sky stretched wide and unfeeling above her. That night, Elias sat at the table, rubbing at the side of his face like something unseen had lodged there. Ayasha stood by the fire, arms folded. "They'll come again," she said. He nodded. "They'll come louder next time." He looked at her. "Then I'll answer louder." She stared at him. "You didn't today." Silence. He sighed, eyes lowered. "I didn't want to make things worse for you." Her laugh was dry. "You think worse hasn't already happened?" Elias pushed back from the table. "I'm trying to do right by you." "No," she said. "You're trying to avoid choosing me. There's a difference." He didn't respond. Ayasha turned away. Later, when the babies were asleep and the house was quiet except for the pop of embers, Ayasha stepped outside and sat on the porch alone. The wind brushed her cheeks. The sky was split with stars. She whispered into the darkness. "They whisper because I feed them. They hate what they don't understand, love without claim." Behind her, Elias watched from the doorway. He didn't come out. He didn't speak. In the early morning, Ayasha took the empty water jug and walked to the bluff where the wild herbs grew: sage, yarrow, rabbit brush. She bent low, her knees pressing into the dust, hands methodically picking what she needed. As she rose, basket full, she caught movement beyond the fence line. Hester Bell. And Mrs. Soren again. But this time they weren't alone. A third figure had joined them, tall, wrapped in black, with gloves and a riding cloak that shimmered with wealth and clean seams. Her posture was straight, her expression unreadable. She stood stiffly, studying the house like it was a puzzle she already knew the answer to. When she turned, Ayasha saw her face, calm, composed, white. Her lips were painted, her hands uncalloused. This woman wasn't just curious. She was planning something. Ayasha's stomach knotted. She walked back to the house slower this time, feeling the shift in the wind, the tightening of something invisible. Inside, the twins had started to coo, waking to hunger. She picked up Key first. He reached for her immediately. Then Sani. They latched with no hesitation. Ayasha closed her eyes. This was the part no one saw. The warmth of skin against skin. The trust of tiny fingers clinging to her shawl. The silence of peace. They could whisper all they wanted. These children knew. They always knew. The morning air was too still. Not peaceful, tight. Like the pause before something breaks. Even the babies seemed to feel it. They barely stirred in their cradle near the fire, unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before thunder. Ayasha sat at the table sipping the bitter coffee Elias had poured without looking her in the eye. She watched the way he hunched over his own cup, silent. Not out of peace, out of avoidance. She spoke first. "Who's coming?" He didn't answer right away, just shifted in his chair and rubbed at the corner of his eye. "Reverend Cole," he said finally. "And a woman. Catherine Westfield." Ayasha didn't blink. To see the babies, Elias nodded once. Just a visit. She set her cup down harder than she meant to. Coffee sloshed over the rim. "Is she coming as a guest?" Ayasha asked, "or as a replacement?" He hesitated. A beat too long. "That's what I thought," she said, rising to her feet. Elias looked up at her. "Ayasha," she didn't let him finish. "You didn't let her die," she said. "But you sure let me drown." Her voice was quiet, but it cut sharper than a shout. Elias's jaw clenched. "That's not fair!" "No," she said, arms crossed tight over her chest. "It's honest." He stood too now. "I didn't ask them to come. But you didn't tell them not to. I thought." He trailed off helpless. "I thought maybe having options was better than having enemies." Ayasha stared at him like she'd never seen him before. "They don't want to feed your babies, Elias. They want to erase the fact that I did." A shadow passed the window. Too late to say more. A black carriage pulled into the yard, polished to a mirror shine. Its wheels rolled smooth and steady over the dry dirt, like it didn't belong in this place. Like it belonged somewhere cleaner, more civilized. Ayasha stepped back from the window, lips pressed tight. The woman who emerged was tall, pale, and perfect. Her gloves reached her elbows, her bodice was laced tight, and her expression was carved from ice. She didn't even blink as she looked around the property. Behind her came Reverend Cole holding his hat like it was a shield. Elias opened the door. "Mr. Grayson," the Reverend said. "Miss Ayasha." He stepped aside. "This is Mrs. Catherine Westfield. She's been staying in Silver Creek since her husband passed. A fine woman of Christian character, and thankfully experience with infants." Catherine inclined her head just enough to acknowledge them without bowing. "I heard of your tragedy," she said to Elias, "and of your situation." Ayasha felt her stomach twist. "I understand someone stepped in temporarily," Catherine continued, her gaze flicking to Ayasha and back. "But I've offered to provide something more permanent, stable." "She means palatable," Ayasha muttered under her breath. Reverend Cole smiled tightly. "We're all simply thinking of the children." "They're upstairs," Elias said. He looked between the two women and finally added, "Ayasha's been nursing them." Catherine's eyes narrowed just slightly. "I'm told she's not family." "I'm told that doesn't matter to a hungry child," Ayasha said, her voice flat. Reverend Cole stepped in again. "This isn't a judgment of character, Miss Ayasha. We appreciate what you've done. But the town is concerned. About appearances. About the twins' future. Their upbringing." Catherine smiled again, this time with steel behind her teeth. "It's not that you're not good," she said. "It's that you're not right." Ayasha stepped forward. I wasn't right when I buried my own daughter in silence, she said. And I wasn't right when I walked 2 miles bleeding milk because no one else would come. But your babies are still breathing because of me. So maybe right doesn't matter. For the first time, Catherine's expression shifted. Not fear, not surprise, just calculation. She stepped toward the cradle. The babies stirred. Ayasha moved between them. They know me, she said. They reach for me. You take me away, they won't eat. Reverend Cole looked uneasy. We're simply suggesting a transition. Over time. Ayasha turned to Elias. She didn't say anything, just looked at him. This was the moment, the line in the sand. Say something, she begged him silently. Say anything. But he didn't. He looked at the floor, and the silence screamed. She packed in the dark after Catherine and the Reverend left. She didn't slam drawers or weep loudly. She moved like someone who had already done this in her head 100 times. A folded shawl, the worn Bible with her daughter's name inside, a carved rattle from Nali. Elias stood in the doorway, arms limp at his sides. I didn't ask for this, he said. You didn't stop it either. They meant well. They meant to erase me. The babies whimpered from the cradle. She paused, then crossed the room and picked them up one last time, rocked them gently, fed them slowly, watched their eyes flutter closed. You'll forget me, she whispered into Sani's hair, but I won't forget you. When she placed them down, she pressed the patchwork quilt around their tiny bodies. Her hands lingered longer than necessary. At the door, Elias caught her arm. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. But it did, she said, because you let it. The boarding house felt like the world before the babies, too cold, too loud, too hollow. Ayasha didn't cry that first night. She just lay on the narrow mattress and waited for the milk to come. And it did. With pain, with heat, with memory. She bit her pillow to keep quiet. The next morning she walked to the market for bread. The whispers followed her. She's back already. Didn't last long, did she? She made her bed. Ayasha kept her head high, not for pride, for spite. She worked in the boarding house kitchen during the day. At night she wrote letters she never sent. 2 days passed, then 3. On the 4th, the knock came. She opened the door. Elias stood there, eyes bloodshot, arms full. Both babies screamed in his arms, red-faced, hoarse, frantic. They won't eat, he said, voice shaking. She tried everything. Bottles, cow's milk, they just cry. Ayasha took Key without a word. He stopped crying the moment her hand touched his back. Elias knelt beside her as she nursed him, holding Sani as tears streamed down his face. I'm sorry, he whispered. I thought I was doing the right thing. Ayasha said nothing. Sani cried harder in his arms. When it was her turn, Ayasha pulled her close and kissed her forehead. I'll come morning and night, she said quietly. Nothing more. Elias flinched. That's not enough. She didn't look up. It's all I have left. And when she stood, the babies full and calm again, she walked away. A woman who gives life becomes a threat to those who can't. The words hadn't been said aloud, but Ayasha felt them in every glance, every whisper, every deliberate turn of a back as she made her way to the ranch that morning. The frost hadn't melted yet, and her boots crunched over the brittle grass, steady and certain, even as her chest carried something heavier than milk. In her basket were small things, boiled linen wraps, wild yarrow, dried lavender, and two hand-carved animals she'd shaped in the silence of the boarding house, one a bear, the other a hawk. She didn't know why she made them. Maybe because they were protectors. Maybe because she wanted the babies to hold something that had come from her hands. Elias opened the door before she knocked. "They've been asking for you," he said, voice low. She stepped past him without answering. Key let out a squawk from his blanket on the floor, while Sani kicked with tiny fury beside him. The moment they saw her, the room seemed to change. Lighter, warmer. Ayasha knelt and pulled them to her chest. She didn't cry anymore when they latched. But the ache never left. "You smell like wood smoke," Elias said, breaking the moment. He stood by the window, mug in hand. "I passed the bakery on my way. I remember that smell," he said, "from before all this." She kept her eyes on the twins. "You remember the smell. I remember the fire." He was quiet. The babies fed slowly, eyes drifting closed. "They're heavier," Ayasha said, more alert. "They like the sound of your voice," Elias replied. "They don't sleep through mine." She allowed the corner of her mouth to twitch. "They've got good instincts." A beat passed. "I saw Reverend Cole," he said finally. "He told me Catherine left town." Ayasha looked up. "Back east," he added. "Told me she'd done her Christian duty." Said nothing more. Ayasha sat back on her heels. She didn't come to help. She came to own. She didn't get what she wanted, Elias said. Neither did the Reverend. No. The silence stretched. "They wanted to make them forget," Ayasha said. "Forget the cries. Forget the blood. Forget me." Elias stared at the floor. "I didn't stop them." "No," she said. "You didn't." But she softened as she looked at him. Something in his face was different now, raw, hollowed out by something more honest than guilt. "They won't forget you," he said. "The twins. Even if they don't remember your face, they'll remember your scent, your skin, your heartbeat." Ayasha blinked, surprised by the gentleness. "I'm not trying to make it right," Elias said, "but I am trying not to make it worse." She nodded once, and that for now was enough. Later that afternoon in town, the wind picked up. Ayasha stopped by the dry goods store for more cloth and a spool of thread. As she stepped out, she heard it. "She's still playing, Mother?" Hester Bell hissed to someone beside her. "Walking around like her milk gives her a name. She thinks feeding is love," the other woman said. "It's just biology." Ayasha didn't flinch. Not anymore. She walked past them, shoulders back, chin high. Inside the store, the young clerk leaned over the counter. "I'm glad they've got you," he whispered. Ayasha raised an eyebrow. "My ma died when I was born," he said. "A woman down the road nursed me. I still remember her hair. It smelled like pine and starch." He looked at her for a long moment. "You matter," he said. Ayasha swallowed. "Thank you." It wasn't a shield, but it was something. She left the store and sat for a long while outside on a bench near the church steps. The babies weren't hers. Not by law, not by blood. But their lives still depended on her, and maybe that was more than enough. At the ranch that evening, Elias was already waiting outside. The porch lamp swung gently in the wind, casting long shadows across the dirt. "They're asleep," he said. She stepped past him again, heading straight to the kitchen. "I made tea," he offered. She hesitated, then sat. They didn't speak for a while, just sipped. "It's funny," he said. I used to think men like me were supposed to fix things. Ayasha gave him a look. I know, he said, holding up a hand. I'm not saying I did. Just that I thought I should. Maybe fixing isn't the point, she said. Maybe the point is not letting the next fire burn the same way. He nodded. I wrote to Nali, he said suddenly. Told her I was sorry for not stepping in sooner. Ayasha's breath caught. She wrote back. Said she left Hashke. Took a train west. Good, Ayasha said, voice thin. She said, she's proud of you. Ayasha stared into her tea. She shouldn't be. She left me there. She knows, Elias said. She said she sees it now. Ayasha closed her eyes. She won't be the last to try, she said after a while, to take them from me. No, Elias agreed, but she won't be the last to fail either. They sat in silence until the tea cooled. Before she left, he stepped into her path. I don't want you coming and going anymore, he said. I want you to stay. She looked up at him. I'm not asking because of them, he said. I'm asking because of you. Ayasha didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. At sunrise the next morning there was a note under the door of the boarding house. Unmarked envelope. No return address. 5 words scratched in harsh ink. Judge wants the babies removed. She stared at it, fingers trembling. No signature. No explanation. Just intent. She read it again and again. Then folded it carefully, tucked it into her apron, and made her way to the ranch. She didn't speak of it. Not yet. She fed the babies, hummed low and soft as their eyes fluttered closed. Elias noticed her silence. What is it? She shook her head. Later. But the truth sat like a stone in her gut. They hadn't stopped. They were just getting smarter. And she'd have to be smarter too. She kissed the tops of the twins' heads, held them closer than usual. The wind rattled the glass outside. A storm was coming, and this time it would wear a judge's robes. Ayasha sat on the edge of the courthouse bench, back straight, hands clasped in her lap so tightly the knuckles had gone white. Her shawl was frayed along the seams, her dress pressed as best as it could be. The stone floor beneath her feet sapped the warmth straight from her bones. She didn't shiver. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The room smelled of old paper mold and power. Elias sat beside her, freshly shaved but stiff, like the suit he wore belonged to someone else. He had spent the night pacing, barely touching his food, speaking only in half-formed sentences. He'd offered to speak for her. She had declined. The twins were not allowed inside. They were with a widow named Dora Phelps, an older woman Ayasha didn't know well, but trusted enough with 2 hours and a bottle of expressed milk. Still, her body ached with the distance. Her chest was swollen. Her ears rang with phantom cries. Across the room, Reverend Cole sat smug in the front row, flanked by Louisa Sorin and 2 other members of the Ladies' Benevolence Society. All 3 women wore tight faces and darker dresses than the day required. At the bench sat Judge Harriman. His robe had been let out at the shoulders but still strained against the swell of his chest. He looked down through smudged spectacles, adjusting them with slow ceremony. This hearing is to evaluate the matter of guardianship regarding the infants of the late Jack and Annie Morrison, he intoned. Petitioned by Reverend Cole and supported by Mrs. Louisa Sorin. Ayasha kept her face neutral. She isn't blood, Louisa said, stepping to the stand. She has no legal tie to those children. She is unmarried. She lives in a boarding house. Until recently, she resided with her sister and brother-in-law under scandalous circumstances. Ayasha heard a low hum of agreement ripple through the room. She is for all intents and purposes a squatter with a wet nurse's body and no place in civilized society, Louisa finished. Reverend Cole cleared his throat. The town wishes only to ensure the children are raised in a God-fearing, law-abiding household, not by someone who walks alone, answers to no one, and believes mothering is a matter of proximity. Judge Harriman scribbled something, then looked up. Miss Ayasha. She stood, slowly, deliberately. He gestured. State your relation to the children. She paused, looked each person in the eye, even the ones who looked away first. I didn't carry them in my body, she said, but I carried them through the fire. The room stilled. When their mother died, there was no plan, no bottle waiting, no one knocking, just two babies screaming for something they couldn't name. And me. Her voice didn't tremble. It was too full for that. I held them when no one else would. I fed them when no one else could. I walked 6 miles in pain and silence to reach them because my body knew they were alive even when everyone else had moved on. Her voice grew stronger. When they cried, I came. When they were sick, I stayed. I didn't sign a paper. I didn't write a will. But I wrote something else into their skin, into their bones. They know me. Louisa opened her mouth. Ayasha didn't stop. I've been spat on in the street, called names, judged for something as sacred as giving life. And still I come. Every morning, every night. Judge Harriman leaned forward. That's all very moving, Miss Ayasha, but love is not law. No, she agreed. But law doesn't hold a child at midnight when he can't breathe. Law doesn't hum lullabies from memory. Law doesn't smell like milk and cedar and hope. Elias stood then. No cue, no prompt. She saved them, he said, voice rough. I didn't. The town didn't. She did. Judge Harriman looked between them. You are not married. No, Elias said. Would you be willing to change that? Ayasha inhaled sharply. That's not why I'm here, she said. Perhaps not, the judge replied. But it may become relevant. The hearing recessed for lunch. Ayasha stepped outside into the drizzle, breathing hard. The sky was the color of soot. Elias followed. You didn't have to do that alone. Yes, I did. He nodded. Still, I was proud. They sat on the courthouse steps, side by side, sharing a flask of lukewarm coffee. Her hands were shaking slightly. They'll find a way to twist it, she said. They'll say I'm emotional. That I overstepped. Let them, he said. A boy approached, then barefoot, soaked, carrying an envelope. For her, he said, thrusting it at Ayasha and darting off. She unfolded the paper. Temporary custody granted. Review in 60 days. She gave you 60 days, Elias whispered. No, Ayasha corrected. She gave us 60 days to prove we matter. That night, Ayasha couldn't sleep. The twins nestled against her chest on the small guest bed at the ranch. Rain tapped against the roof, and every creak in the wood sounded like a threat. She got up, walked to the main room where Elias sat by the fire, half asleep. They'll come back stronger, she said. He nodded. I'm scared, she added. He looked up at her. Good, he said. Means you're still willing to fight. She sat beside him. Then he said it. Marry me. She turned, blinking. I'm not asking for law. I'm not asking for appearances. I'm asking because when I see those babies smile up at you, I see something that feels like home." She didn't answer. Then before she could speak, a knock echoed against the door. Elias rose, cautious. When he opened it, a soaked figure stood in the dark. Nali, her hair plastered to her cheeks, a suitcase at her feet. "I left him," she said. "I came here. If there's room." Ayasha stared. "I couldn't keep watching from a distance," Nali added, voice breaking. "I want to help." Ayasha stepped forward, wrapped her arms around her sister. "You're late," she whispered. "But you came." The door shut behind them, and for one quiet moment the storm outside seemed to pause. Ayasha looked down at the sleeping twins, then at Elias, then at the woman who'd once walked away and had now walked back. "We have 60 days, she said. Elias nodded. "So let's start building something worth keeping. If they take them from me, they will not take me from them." It became a prayer, a battle cry, a line drawn in dirt and blood and milk. Ayasha whispered it under her breath as she folded the baby's clothes, as she watched the horizon for signs of riders, as she tightened her shawl and breathed through the sharp ache of a body full of milk and grief. The twins had started to roll over on their own. They squealed now when touched, smiled wide, and reached with purpose. They were no longer just surviving. They were living. And every bit of that life had Ayasha's fingerprints in it. But 60 days wasn't a promise. It was a clock. And clocks ran out. Since the custody hearing, the town hadn't softened. It had grown quieter in its cruelty. The stares were no longer curious, they were resentful. Twice someone had scratched thief into the boarding house door. Once a butcher refused her service with a sneer. The baker she used to pass each morning now turned the closed sign as soon as he saw her shadow approach. The worst came on a Thursday morning. She wore the twins on her chest, wrapped snug against her in a blanket she had hand-dyed with berries. A woman she didn't know stepped into her path outside the feed store. "You think feeding them makes them yours?" the woman hissed. Ayasha didn't stop. "You think milk is enough to replace a mother?" Ayasha kept walking, head high. But that night, after putting the babies to sleep, she sat beside the fireplace and scrubbed a patch of skin on her arm, raw, furiously, wordlessly, like trying to erase someone else's fingerprints from her body. Nali found her like that. "You're not a thief," Nali said softly. "You're not temporary." Ayasha didn't speak. Nali took the cloth from her and replaced it with a clean one soaked in warm lavender water. "You're not doing this alone anymore," she whispered. "We're your blood. We're your spine." And for the first time in what felt like years, Ayasha let herself believe it. The days grew colder, the wind harsher. Elias spent afternoons chopping firewood with quiet purpose. Nali took to humming softly in the mornings as she stirred oatmeal, her voice a thin thread of comfort stretching between pots and pans. The house, patched and uneven, began to feel like a home not borrowed, but built. Still, the knock came. Sheriff Madsen stood at the porch, his hat in his hands. Ayasha knew before he said a word. "There's been an order," he said, eyes heavy. "Temporary removal. They're calling it a welfare check. They want to see how the babies adjust to alternate care." "Alternate care," Elias said, stepping beside her. "They've assigned a woman, Emily Sykes, childless, mid-30s, certified through the county, lives alone 2 acres out west." Ayasha's breath turned to stone in her lungs. "She's never held them," she said. "They don't know her." "I know," the sheriff said. "But my hands are tied." "They'll starve," Ayasha whispered. "They still nurse." You can provide milk, he said. She agreed to accept bottles. That's not the same, Ayasha snapped. I know that too. Nolly stepped up behind her, one hand on her shoulder. We'll fight it. You have until sundown, the sheriff said. I'm sorry. He turned and left. Inside, Ayasha collapsed onto the floor beside the twins. She fed them one by one, tears sliding silently down her face. She whispered stories into their hair, brushed her cheek against their soft heads, and tucked love into every touch. When they came to take them, Ayasha wrapped them in blankets she had stitched herself, tucked in a strip of cedar under each one, kissed their foreheads twice. Sani reached for her braid. Key whimpered as he was handed off. You will not forget me, Ayasha whispered, and I will not let the world forget you. As the door closed behind them, the silence that followed was unlike anything she'd ever heard. It was not the stillness of peace, it was the silence of something sacred being ripped away. That night, Ayasha couldn't sleep. She stepped out into the pasture in bare feet. The grass was brittle and sharp, but she welcomed the sting. Elias followed her, a coat thrown over his shoulders. They'll break without you, he said. Ayasha stared at the moon. They'll survive, but they'll forget my heartbeat, my scent, my song. Elias reached for her hand. She let him take it. If they take them from me, she said, voice low, they will not take me from them. He nodded. Then we'll stay close. Every day. The next morning she arrived at the Sykes' home before the sun had crested the hills. She knocked once. No answer. She knocked again. Finally, Emily Sykes opened the door. Her face was pale, lined with weariness and sleep. You can't be here, she said. I brought milk, Ayasha replied, lifting the tin bottle she had filled before dawn. Emily eyed it, then stepped aside. Ayasha placed it on the porch and left. The next day she came again. This time Emily didn't answer at all. On the fourth day, the door opened. They cried all night, Emily said. Wouldn't take the bottle. I don't know what I'm doing. They need skin, Ayasha said. Smell, familiar rhythm. Emily hesitated, then stepped back. Ayasha walked in. The twins wailed until she picked them up, then fell into her like they'd been holding their breath. She stayed an hour, then left. The next day she stayed 2. By the 7th day she was feeding them again, skin to skin, sitting on a stiff couch in a too-clean house. You don't have to like me, Ayasha said. But they know me. I know, Emily said. I see it. Elias worked behind the scenes, submitting appeals, gathering testimony from townsfolk whose minds had changed. Nolly wrote to a journalist she knew from her schooling in Santa Fe. The woman ran a column, The Woman Who Fed the Forgotten. It spread, slowly, but surely. By day 23, someone offered to pay Ayasha's market bill. On day 28, a neighbor left a fresh pie on their porch. On day 30, she wasn't alone in the courthouse hallway anymore. Still, each night before bed, she whispered the same vow. If they take them from me, they will not take me from them. And each night her resolve thickened like ice on the river. What if the best place for them isn't a place at all, but a person? Emily Sykes didn't mean to think it, much less say it aloud. But the words slipped out one afternoon as she stood by the window watching Ayasha rock Sani gently in the parlor. Key slept across her shoulder, his mouth still moist from feeding. Both babies were heavy in her arms, trusting and calm. Emily hadn't seen them like that since the day they'd arrived. And she hadn't seen herself like this either, watching from the sidelines, letting someone else take the lead in a house that was supposed to be hers. The truth came like a whisper, uncomfortable and undeniable. She didn't belong to them, and they didn't belong to her. They settle when she sings, Emily said quietly. Ayasha looked up from the chair. Babies know what love sounds like. The words weren't sharp, just final. Emily nodded once and retreated into the kitchen, where she busied herself with a pie she no longer had the appetite to finish. Her hands moved by memory, not intention. Her heart felt like it was learning how to shrink. By the end of the second week, Ayasha was at the house nearly 8 hours a day. Not because anyone asked her to. She came because the twins needed her. Because they cried if she didn't. Because they had learned her rhythm, her voice, her warmth, her scent, and anything less was a disruption of their very foundation. At first, Emily had resented it. Then she'd accepted it. And now she was unsure whether she was helping or simply delaying what should have been inevitable. The second review hearing was set for the end of the month. A pale yellow envelope arrived bearing the county seal. Emily read the letter once, then again, then passed it to Ayasha the next time she visited. They'll ask again, Emily said. What's best for the twins? Ayasha held the letter in both hands. Her fingers trembled just slightly. I don't know what that answer is anymore. Yes, you do, Emily said gently. You've always known. At the ranch, the news shifted the air. Elias read the letter out loud at the dinner table, then folded it carefully, like it might burn if mishandled. Nolly set her spoon down, already reaching for ink and paper. She had a list of potential witnesses, townsfolk, the midwife, even the pastor from her old mission school in Chimayo, who had once called Ayasha a vessel of grace. They were ready to fight. But what came to the door wasn't war. It was a knock, a firm one. Just after dawn, Elias opened it to a tall man in a worn cavalry coat hat, in hand, his eyes sharp with sun and years. Name's Fletcher Grant, he said. I rode with your brother. You Elias, right? Elias's jaw tightened. What do you want? Your brother wrote about you, Fletcher said. Said you had more heart than sense, that the war didn't break you, just turned you quiet. Elias's hand dropped from the doorframe. He never mentioned you. He wouldn't. He didn't talk much. But he wrote. He wrote about this place, about wanting to come back. Said it felt like home even when he didn't anymore. Ayasha had come into the room by then, drawn by the voices. Fletcher looked at her. I read about the babies in the Santa Fe Gazette. Saw your name. I've buried more orphans than I can count, ma'am. In trenches. On riverbanks. In places too cruel to name. Ayasha's mouth went dry. I figured if I could keep 2 more from becoming ghosts, it was worth the ride. Ayasha nodded slowly. It counts. Elias stepped aside and let him in. When they arrived at the courthouse 3 days later, the room was nothing like the first hearing. It was packed. Strangers, familiar faces, reporters with notebooks and cameras that clicked like nervous teeth. Even Judge Harriman looked different. Not just tired, older, like the burden of judgment had grown heavier since the last time they saw him. This proceeding will determine permanent guardianship of the Morrison twins, he began. Testimony will be heard from both concerned parties and supporting witnesses. Ayasha sat beside Elias and Nolly. Across the room, Emily Sykes sat alone, her shoulders squared with quiet resolve. The testimonies began. Nolly spoke first, clear, measured. Her voice didn't shake once. She didn't rescue them because she wanted to be a mother, Nolly said. She did it because someone had to. And she stayed because she chose them every single day. Next came Fletcher. The courtroom stilled as he took the stand. His presence filled the space like smoke. "I've seen what happens to children shuffled around like playing cards," he said. "You lose something doing that, not just innocence. You lose your anchor." I watched this woman hold two strangers like they were bone of her bone. I've seen mothers do far less with far more. There were murmurs of agreement from the gallery. Then came Emily. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her voice was soft but unshaken. "I've cared for them," she said. "I've fed them, rocked them, changed them. I've done everything I could, but I'm not what they need." "You've done more than most," the judge replied. "But it's not about me," she said. "It's about them. And they don't want me." They settle when Ayasha's in the room. They stop crying when they smell her. They laugh when they hear her voice. That's not something you forge. That's something you're born into or reborn into like they were. The judge leaned forward. "You're recommending that custody go to Miss Ayasha?" Emily nodded. "What if the best place for them isn't a place at all, but a person?" she said, her voice steadier now. "She's that person." Ayasha covered her mouth with both hands, choking back sound. Nolly reached for her, grasped her wrist gently. The judge sat back quiet for a long moment. "I'll take everything into consideration," he said. "Final ruling will be delivered in 72 hours. As the courtroom began to empty, Ayasha stood. She walked past Emily in the hallway. They didn't speak, just met eyes and nodded something like peace passing between them. Outside, the wind tugged at her shawl like a restless child. "I don't know what will happen," she said to Elias. "But we're not invisible anymore," he replied. "That counts." Ayasha exhaled deeply, and for the first time it felt like breathing. Blood doesn't raise a child, love does, but the law doesn't always see it that way. Ayasha stood at the edge of the porch, the letter in her hand trembling with a weight that was both terrifying and long-awaited. The envelope had arrived early that morning, hand-delivered by a postal rider, too young to know he was carrying someone's future. He smiled as he handed it over, unaware that Ayasha's knees nearly gave out as soon as the door closed. By the time Elias returned from the feed store and Nolly made it back from her errands in town, the envelope remained unopened on the table, its corners damp with her fingerprints. "You ready?" Elias asked, setting his hat down gently. Ayasha didn't respond immediately. Her fingers hovered, then slid under the flap. The rip of the paper was the only sound in the room. She unfolded the single sheet slowly, her eyes scanning the first few lines, before widening with disbelief. Nolly stepped closer. "Ayasha." Ayasha choked back a sob, then whispered, "We won." She was their legal guardian. Full custody, permanent. She wasn't just the woman who carried them across the desert or rocked them through fever and grief. She was their mother by law, by love, by every measure that mattered. Elias exhaled loudly, then pulled her close. Nolly wrapped her arms around them both, a soft laugh, and tears mingling as she pressed her forehead to Ayasha's. The twins babbled from their cradle in the corner, blissfully unaware that the storm over their heads had at least for now broken into sunlight. Word spread like wildfire. By sunset, neighbors started appearing at the ranch with gifts and hugs. The pastor from the pueblo brought fresh bread. A school teacher from the valley handed over a stack of children's books tied with ribbon. Even Emily Sykes showed up quietly, offering a bundle of sage and a hand-carved rattle. "They sleep better with something real near," she said, her voice softer than Ayasha had ever heard. Ayasha nodded, unable to speak. That night, for the first time in months, she slept straight through until dawn. But peace, as she knew too well, had a short breath in this world. 2 mornings later, another letter arrived. This one didn't bear the seal of the court or any familiar name. It was handwritten, sealed with wax, and the return address was little more than a smudge from a northern outpost near Taos. Inside, a name that sent cold down her spine. Samuel Morrison, Annie's cousin. A man no one had seen at the funeral. No phone calls. No condolences. No visits. Nothing but blood and entitlement. The letter was brief, curt, a declaration of his intent to pursue custody of the twins. Not out of affection, there was none in his words, but duty. Family should raise family, he wrote. Blood matters more than good intentions. Ayesha's hand clenched so tightly the paper crinkled. Her stomach rolled. It was as if someone had thrown open the door to the past and let all the ghosts in. She stepped outside, still in her slippers, and found Elias feeding the horses. Without a word, she handed him the letter. He read it, then read it again. His face didn't move, but something behind his eyes shifted. Nolly came out seconds later and took the letter from his hand. "This man is a snake," she muttered. "Why now?" "Because he smells something to claim," Elias said. "Not something to love." "We call Thomas," Ayesha said. By nightfall, their lawyer Thomas Velez was seated at their kitchen table, glasses perched low on his nose. He read the letter carefully, then set it down, steepling his fingers in thought. "It's not a formal petition." "Not yet," he said. "But it's a warning shot." "Could he win?" Elias asked bluntly. Thomas took a breath. "If he files a petition, he'll have to prove that the court made an error in judgment, or that conditions have changed. But the law still respects bloodlines, especially in contested custody cases. We'll need to prepare." Ayesha's chest tightened. "He doesn't even know them. He's never held them, never asked their names." "That doesn't always matter in court," Thomas said quietly. "Blood gives standing, even if love should matter more." "Then we fight," Ayesha said. Her voice didn't waver. "We fight smart," Thomas added, "and loud." That night, Ayesha didn't sleep. She watched the twins with a kind of sacred protectiveness, her fingers brushing their cheeks like she was memorizing them all over again. The following week, another letter came. This one was typed formal with a law office's insignia stamped at the top. Samuel Morrison had filed an official motion to challenge her custody. They had 2 weeks. The air in the house changed. Nolly began coordinating with allies in town, women from the school, the pastor, even an old ranch hand who remembered Annie Morrison as a girl. Elias called in a favor to a friend at the Gazette, setting up a meeting for an editorial piece. "We go public," he said. "Let the town know who he is and who she is." Ayesha started writing again, letters, affidavits, timelines. Her days became filled with paperwork and calls. But at night, she still rocked the babies. She still whispered their names into the quiet, like prayers she refused to lose. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Elias found her sitting on the porch, both twins in her lap, one sleeping and one chewing on her braid. "You're tired," he said. "I can't afford tired," she replied. "You're not alone." "I know," she said. Then after a pause, "But I still feel like I am." He sat beside her, watching the road. "He thinks blood gives him a right," Ayesha whispered. Elias shook his head. "Blood doesn't raise a child. Love does, but the law doesn't always see it that way." She nodded slowly. "Then we teach them." The wind picked up, brushing through the porch slats. Ayesha looked down at the children. Her children, and swore again silently, that she would not lose them. In the distance, a dust trail rose on the main road. Something or someone was coming. Sometimes the strongest weapon you have is the truth spoken by someone else. The dust cloud started small, then grew into a thick trail rising like smoke on the horizon. Ayasha stepped onto the porch, one baby at her hip, the other curled against her chest in the sling. Her stomach twisted with the kind of knowing that came from the old world. Intuition passed down from grandmothers who could feel storms before the clouds formed. Even the chickens had gone silent. The dogs didn't bark. Nolly stood near the barn, one hand raised to block the sun. "It's him," she said. Samuel Morrison rode in on a lean bay gelding's spine, rigid shoulders squared like a man arriving not to ask, but to take. He wore his arrogance like a badge. Boots shined too bright, shirt too white, hat tilted just so. He didn't belong to the dust or the people in it. He dismounted slowly, brushed off his sleeves, and walked toward the house like it was already his. Elias stepped off the porch and planted himself in Samuel's path. "You can turn around now," he said, voice low, but solid. Samuel gave him a tight-lipped smile. "That's not how kin works. You're no kin of theirs." "I'm the closest blood they've got," Samuel said calmly. "That still means something." Ayasha tightened the sling, holding Sani close to her chest. Key stirred on her hip, but didn't wake. "You've got nerve showing up now," Elias added. "You weren't there when Annie died. You didn't come to the hospital, the burial, the hearings. You waited until they were safe to come crawling with paper." Samuel's eyes slid to Ayasha. "I came to see the children." "No," she said. "You came to claim them. That's different." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a folded document. He extended it toward her, but Elias snatched it first. "It's my motion," Samuel said. "Filed in Albuquerque yesterday. Judge will get it tomorrow. I'm asking the court to reconsider placement. I have blood. I have standing." Ayasha felt heat rise behind her eyes, but she stayed still. "They are not yours," she said. "They never were." "We'll let the court decide," Samuel said, then turned back toward his horse. "You didn't even look at them," Nolly called out after him. But Samuel didn't answer. Dust kicked up behind his boots as he rode away, the sun casting his shadow far too long behind him. That night, the house felt different. No sleep came easy. Elias stayed up reading Samuel's motion under the lamplight. Nolly made lists. Ayasha sat at the table, with the twins in her arms, scribbling thoughts, dates, memories, anything that might help Thomas build their defense. By morning, word had spread. But what came next was something Ayasha hadn't expected. The town rose not with pitchforks or fists, but with letters, names, voices. The postmistress came with a signed statement. "She picks up their formula every week herself," she said. "Never once sent someone else." The schoolteacher walked 3 miles in worn shoes to deliver a notarized letter. Her babies already have a desk waiting at the Pueblo school. The preacher brought a photograph taken the month before Ayasha with the twins in the garden, their faces sun-drenched and laughing. "This is what parenting looks like," he said. "Not blood. Presence." Even Emily came again, quieter this time, holding a wrinkled newspaper. "You might want this." The headline read, "Local man accused in land scam, native families defrauded." Beneath it, Samuel Morrison's photo, from 3 years prior. Eyes hard, smirk present even then. "He promised jobs," Emily whispered. "Water rights, left with cash and vanished." Ayasha studied the article like it was a new map. "Will a judge believe this?" she asked. "He doesn't have to believe all of it," Elias said. "Just enough to ask why someone like that wants 2 children he's never met." Ayasha folded the paper, placed it atop her stack of documents, and nodded. We bring everything, Thomas called that evening. The hearing was moved up Friday morning. Urgent review due to overlapping petitions, he said. Be ready. By Thursday, Ayasha had written 22 pages of notes. Elias organized witness letters. Nali prepped bags. The twins, sensing the tension, fussed and refused sleep, clinging to Ayasha like vines. I don't want to leave them, she told Emily. I'll stay with them, Emily said. And if he shows up, he'll wish he hadn't. Friday came like thunder. They rode out before dawn. The courthouse steps were crowded, neighbors, townsfolk, even the Gazette reporter, stood with a notepad in hand. Inside, Samuel sat smug in the front row, his lawyer whispering in his ear. Ayasha didn't look at them. She held her notes in one hand and Elias's steady fingers in the other. The judge began. This hearing concerns the custody review of Key and Sonny Morrison, petitioned by Mr. Samuel Morrison. Samuel's lawyer rose. My client is the children's only remaining biological relative. The court failed to prioritize bloodline. We ask that custody be transferred to family. Thomas stood. Family is who feeds you, who shelters you, who wakes up at 2 a.m. to rock you through fever. Ayasha Yazzie has done that and more. The judge remained still, but not unmoved. Then came the voices. One by one, townspeople stood. Testimonies flowed like river water, some brief, some shaking with emotion, all undeniable. Ayasha's house was painted in their words, safe, warm, steady, sacred. And finally, Emily took the stand. I used to think blood meant more, she said. But then I saw how they reached for her, how they cried when she left the room. They didn't choose her because she's strong. They chose her because they felt safe. Then Ayasha rose. She didn't speak with fire, but with rooted truth. I didn't ask to become their mother. I became it moment by moment, tear by tear, not because it was owed to me, because it was right. She looked straight at Samuel. You want to call yourself family. You show up when it's ugly, when it's hard. You bleed for them. You bury your pride. You feed them before yourself. Have you ever done that? Samuel didn't answer. The judge tapped his pen once, then twice. I'll issue a ruling in 72 hours. Outside, the wind picked up. Ayasha stood still, her spine tall. It's not over, Elias said. No, she replied. But now the truth is out. And sometimes that's the strongest weapon we have. And in 3 days, the world would either rise with them or try to tear them apart once more. Sometimes the only way to keep what's yours is to let the world see how hard you're willing to bleed for it. Ayasha hadn't eaten a real meal since the hearing. Not because she didn't want to, but because her stomach felt like it was made of stone. The anxiety pressed in from all sides, heavy and invisible, smothering even the taste of food. She nibbled here and there, but nothing stayed down. Nothing felt solid. Every morning she woke with the same question clawing at her chest. What if they take them anyway? The 72 hours promised by the court passed slower than the desert dries after rain. No messenger, no phone call, no letter. Just stillness. And in that silence, the doubt crawled in. It crept under doors into cracks of thought, poisoning even her moments of hope. Elias tried to stay composed. He worked non-stop, hauling water-fixing shingles, organizing tools that didn't need organizing. Nali, too, stayed busy making preserves and sweeping the porch 3 times a day. Everyone waited together, pretending it didn't gnaw at them. Emily visited often. She never asked if Ayasha had heard anything, she just brought things. A jar of soup, a folded quilt. Once she came with an old music box and wound it up for the twins. The soft melody danced through the house like a lullaby from a world that didn't ask people to prove their love. But Ayasha couldn't rest. The twins cried more than usual. Not loudly, just constantly restless, like they knew the ground beneath them wasn't stable yet. They wouldn't sleep unless Ayasha was touching them. On the third evening, just after supper, a knock came at the door. No one moved. Ayasha's heart hammered as she crossed the floor. On the porch stood the postal rider, dusty and breathless. He handed her a cream-colored envelope stamped with the courthouse seal. "Got here fast," he muttered, tipping his hat. Ayasha closed the door behind her and stared at the letter in her hands. She didn't open it right away. Her palms were sweating. Her knees felt weak. Elias stood beside her. "Want me to?" She shook her head, sat at the table, and slowly opened the flap. The crackle of the seal breaking sounded like a gunshot in the silence. She unfolded the paper, read the words. Once, twice, a third time, stillness washed over her. Then tears. Elias leaned in. "What does it say?" She passed it to him, unable to speak. He read it, his brow furrowing, then breaking into a slow, shaky smile. "You won," he whispered. "You won, Ayasha." The judge had denied Samuel Morrison's petition in full. The ruling was clear and thorough. It cited Ayasha's established caregiving, the overwhelming community support, the children's well-being and stability, and Samuel's lack of involvement in their lives until this point. Emily's testimony had carried weight. So had the article about Samuel's past dealings. Ayasha slumped in her chair and let her head fall into her hands. The sob that escaped her chest was raw and deep, like a wound finally allowed to close. Nolly wrapped her arms around her from behind. "You did it." Ayasha looked up, tears streaming down her face. "We did." News traveled faster than wildfire. By morning, the front porch was full, not of trouble but of gratitude. People brought food, flowers, letters. One woman left a small pair of hand-knitted moccasins. The preacher came by with his wife, who carried something wrapped in deerskin. "This was made by my grandmother," she said softly, unwrapping a cradle board painted with symbols Ayasha recognized from her own people. "It belongs with someone who understands what it means to carry more than weight." Ayasha cradled it against her chest. Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. But peace, even when earned, doesn't land softly. It hovers unsure of where to settle. Samuel had vanished, left town quietly after the hearing. No farewells, no outbursts, just gone. Some said he returned to New Mexico. Others claimed they saw him near the Colorado border. Ayasha didn't care where he went as long as it was far. Still, she felt his shadow, like a snake, might still be curled in the grass, even if you can't see it. She didn't let the twins out of her sight for days. Not out of fear, but instinct. One evening, under the weight of a purple dusk, Ayasha walked out to the cedar grove. She left the lantern behind. Let the dark wrap around her. She knelt by the roots of the oldest tree and pressed her palms to the soil. "I was scared," she said softly. "I thought I might lose them. I thought love wouldn't be enough." The wind moved gently through the branches. She tilted her head back and closed her eyes. But I stayed. I fought. I didn't run. Sometimes the only way to keep what's yours is to let the world see how hard you're willing to bleed for it. And she had bled. Quietly, fiercely, without show or spectacle. Through grief, through fear, through shame. But she never stopped. That was what made her a mother. That night, when she tucked the twins into bed, Sonny grabbed a lock of her hair and babbled softly. Key curled his tiny fingers around hers and didn't let go. A sound escaped from Sonny's mouth, muffled, not quite language, but it made her freeze. Mama. The word was barely formed, soft and unsure, but she heard it. She bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Yes, I am." In the days that followed, the ranch settled into a rhythm, like a heart finding its beat again. Morning chores, afternoon naps. The twins started giggling again, deep belly laughs that bounced off the walls. Elias would pause to listen, as if that sound alone was proof that the world had healed a little. People began to write. Letters came from as far as Montana and Arkansas. Women wrote about raising nieces, men about stepchildren who chose them. One letter came from a judge in Phoenix. "Your testimony reminded me what justice is supposed to protect." Another from a mother in Oklahoma. "I thought I was alone. Now I know I'm not." Ayasha kept every letter, not because she needed praise, but because she understood now her story wasn't just hers. It was a door, a light, a warning. The next chapter hadn't started yet, but when it did, she'd be ready. The wind changed the day after the last letter arrived. It came in a yellowed envelope with no return address, no fancy seal, just a single page inside. The handwriting was old-fashioned and careful, the kind of script that made you slow down just to read it. Each loop and flourish felt like it carried a lifetime of weight. "You don't know me," it began, "but I read about you in a newspaper someone left at the VA hospital. I lost my daughter in childbirth in 1978. Her boy was taken in by strangers. They never asked if I wanted him. Said I wasn't fit. I wasn't ready. I've lived 47 years wondering if I could have been enough. Your story helped me believe maybe I was." Ayasha sat with that letter in her lap, hands trembling slightly. She read it 3 times before folding it into thirds and slipping it into the cedar box Elias had carved for her. Then she walked barefoot across the wooden floor to the window, where the sunlight poured in like honey. The twins were playing on the rug, babbling in their twin-language trading toys and drool like brothers do. She sat down beside them and told them a story, not about blood or battles or judges, but about choice. About love that stays even when it's hard. About how sometimes you find the people who choose you again and again, and how that's the kind of love that lasts. By April, the frost had disappeared from the hills. The trees were budding green again. The ranch breathed easier now, like it too had survived something it wasn't sure it could. Elias repaired the back fence without saying much. Nolly planted sunflower seeds along the east wall. The goats were heavy with spring kids, and the hens were back to laying daily. Life crept in, not loudly, but steadily, like it knew it had a place again. And then came the courthouse again. Not to defend, but to affirm. Adoption. The final papers. The sealing of what everyone already knew to be true. It wasn't a dramatic affair. Same judge. No crowd. No cameras. Just Ayasha in a dress she hadn't worn in months, holding both boys on her lap, while Elias, Nolly, Emily, and Thomas sat behind her in quiet support. "Do you understand what this means?" the judge asked. Ayasha nodded. "It means no one can take them from me." The judge smiled, thin but genuine. "It means they're yours. Forever." Ayasha signed her name letter by letter, hand, steady heart pounding. When they stepped outside, the sky surprised them. A sudden drizzle swept across the dusty courthouse steps. Not cold, not harsh, just soft rain like a benediction. The babies giggled wide-eyed at the drops falling on their hands. Ayasha tilted her head back and let the rain kiss her cheeks. It didn't feel like weather. It felt like permission. Back at the ranch, celebration looked simple. A meal shared, bread warm from the oven. Music from the old radio Elias swore didn't work until Nolly smacked it with a wooden spoon. The twins danced in circles with their arms out, while the adults watched and laughed and tried to memorize the way the moment felt. Peace hadn't come all at once. It had shown up in pieces, sometimes in a smile, sometimes in a slow breath, and sometimes in the absence of fear. Weeks passed, and one morning a letter came from the tribal council. They asked Ayasha to speak at the annual community summit, not as a legal expert, not as a symbol, but as a mother, a voice, a reminder of what happens when people stay. At first she said no, then changed her mind. When she stood in front of that crowd, elders, teens, activists, grandmothers, she didn't bring notes. "I didn't win a fight," she said. "I just refused to let go." She looked out across the sea of faces and added, "Family isn't always born. Sometimes it's made in fire. And the ones who walk through the flames with you, that's your kin." Afterward, a woman placed a newborn in Ayasha's arms. "He needs someone to hold him," the woman said. "Just for a minute." Ayasha cradled him without hesitation. "I've got time." By late May, Elias had added a new room to the house, not because they needed it, but because he believed they might. He built it slow and careful, humming, while he worked, pausing now and then to smile at the sound of Key laughing or Sani chasing a beetle in the dirt. "We're not planning for more," he said one night, "but we're not closing the door either." Ayasha nodded. "Some stories find you when you're ready." One Sunday evening, Ayasha stood on the porch with Emily and Nolly. The sky was layered with color: lavender, rose, orange, the kind of light that doesn't last but stays in memory. Key and Sani were down by the fence picking flowers and sticking them in each other's hair. They argued over which petal belonged where, then laughed and hugged without apology. Emily rocked slowly in the chair Elias fixed. "They know who they are," she said. Ayasha nodded. "That's all I ever hoped for." "You gave it to them," Emily said. "No," Ayasha answered, watching her boys. "They gave it to me." That night she placed the last letter, the one from the VA hospital, above the boy's bed. Not in a frame, just pinned there with care. A reminder that sometimes the hardest roads lead back to people who never stopped hoping. And sometimes when the world breaks you apart, the only way forward is through the hands that help put you back together. Some nights, Ayasha still woke with panic, reaching out, heart racing, afraid the silence meant loss. But then a small foot would brush against her leg. A soft hand would curl into hers. And she would remember love doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it just shows up, stays, fights, and never ever lets go. The story didn't end there. Not really. But this chapter did. And it ended exactly as it should, with love that chose to stay.